All About Eve is the third episode of the second season of Frasier. This is directed by the wonderful Kelsey, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. Generally, it's a really enjoyable episode. I feel like we needed a little bit more variety in the second half, but other than that, I did enjoy it, and there was one moment where I laughed out loud. I do often laugh out loud at Frasier. With this episode, there was one moment in particular that I really loved. It starts off Frasier going into his office. Roz is there. Great to see Roz there. I was really curious to find out how they'd bring the character back into it, because I was aware that she was in the second season. And she was actually visiting Alice, but Alice cancelled, so she decided to go and visit Frasier. And we then cut to Frasier's apartment. Everybody is there pretty much, and Frasier is taking everybody out to an art gallery. And not everybody's as excited about this as Frasier is. And Roz, they get onto the topic of John, who is there, and Roz asks Eve if the guys ever help out with looking after John so she can have some time to herself, and we establish that no, they don't. And Freddy, Alan, and Frasier kind of pass John between them very awkwardly. And Roz decides that the guys are going to look after John so that Eve and Roz can go on a girls' night out. And Olivia is there, and she goes along with them. She refers to Frasier and Alan as two grumpy Muppets, which I absolutely love. I thought that was brilliant. And there we have the main narrative established. The guys are looking after John while the girls are having a girls' night. And we cut to Mahoney's because Frasier realises that his apartment is too dangerous for a baby, by which he means expensive. And they've taken John to Mahoney's, and they realise that they don't all need to have to look after John. Only one of them really needs to babysit. So they try and argue about who's going to look after John. And Alan's argument for not looking after John is to turn around, and we have the baby seat beside him, and he just he hisses. This is the bit where I laughed out loud. Just Nicholas Lyndhurst's performance was fabulous. He hisses at the baby, and it was unexpected. It was very funny, very, very well done. And then other women or women in the bar start to compliment the guys, which I think some people might have a problem with, because if they were three women looking after a baby, they wouldn't get compliments. I feel like some people might have an issue with that. I'm personally choosing to not read that much into it, but if somebody were to argue, why are guys getting praised for looking after a baby, I can understand that sentiment. And they realise having John means that women are actually drawn to them, and they start arguing about who's going to look after John instead, rather than who's going to get a free night. And they ultimately decide to take John to the art gallery, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. We then basically spend the rest of the episode cutting back and forth between the art gallery, where the guys are with John, and the girls' night out. And they do have a few different locations, so that does help to keep that part of it fresh. But as I said, I feel like we just needed something else in that second half. It felt like it was starting to get a teeny little bit repetitive with just kind of the same locations or similar locations. But we do have some interesting moments. And in the art gallery, there is a brilliant moment. There are some really strong moments where they've lost the baby, and then Alan comes into the room pushing the pram with some random child, like this female toddler, on his arms. It's a very peculiar moment. It turns out he was just looking after somebody's child for a second, but it was a very strange moment. And they realise that they do need to get John home for his bedtime. It is past his bedtime, but they can enjoy the idea of John by just putting the hood down on the baby carrier so people can't see the baby, but they assume there is a baby. And they didn't necessarily think this through for numerous reasons, but they decide to do this, but they all have a baby. One of them's got the carrier, one of them's got the pushchair. Alan has wrapped up some wine bottles to look like he's carrying a baby. And it goes well enough for a little bit. They are getting the attention they need. We then cut back to the girls' night, and we have an interesting discussion between Roz and Eve, where Roz keeps trying to help Eve, keeps trying to get her to spend time on herself and date people, and Eve establishes that it's not that Eve needs Roz's help, it's that Roz needs to help Eve. Obviously, with Alice getting older, moving out, going off to college, there is this gap in her life now, and she's kind of trying to fill that by helping Eve, even if Eve doesn't want that help. And I think that that's a really interesting point to make. And I like the fact that Roz didn't push back on that too much. Very quickly, she apologised and everybody's getting along really well. They decide to go to the art gallery, which is going to be really awkward because, as we know, the guys are there. And I'll be honest, I was very confused because all three of them that were there with their fake babies, and I genuinely didn't know. I was confused for a second about where John was. And then we find out quite quickly. And obviously, Eve goes mental at the guys for what they've done. And it turns out John is safe at home with David. David is watching the baby, which made a lot of sense. And also a nice way to bring David into the episode. And I feel like Eve's outburst was completely justified. And everybody leaves apart from Frasier and Alan. I think this was a really moving part. I won't say it's my favourite part of the episode. I'll be honest, Alan hissing at the baby seat was my favourite part. But I think it's the strongest part of the episode. And this is where Alan admits to Frasier that he found out recently his daughter, with whom he has a very strained relationship, in fact, probably a lack of relationship is the more accurate way to describe it, recently found out she was pregnant. She still doesn't want anything to do with him. So, of course, spending time around John was bringing up a lot of emotions, but in a way that he liked. He liked spending time with the baby. And it was a really sweet moment, and nice to just have a little bit of seriousness with Alan as a character. Generally, I love the silliness we get with him and his attitude. It's very, very funny. But at the same time, it's nice to see a slightly more serious, emotional, vulnerable side to the character. And then we cut to the apartment. Everybody is there, including David, and everybody's apologising. And the punishment they have is that they have to watch John for the next 5 months. And we have another really sweet moment where they were going to let Alan off because he's not family, he shouldn't have that responsibility. And we could see the disappointment in Alan's face when he found out he didn't have to watch John. And Frasier could obviously tell this as well, because he very quickly said that Alan should be punished as well as part of the family. I love that. Not only is he there to help him, to allow him this time to look after John, because it's kind of like him, I guess the way with Roz using Eve to fill the gap that Alice moving out has left, Alan looking after John is allowing him to kind of fulfill that grandparent need that he has, that he's not currently able to do or won't be able to do when his daughter has her baby. And Frasier was able to recognise Alan's need for that, but also by referring to him as part of the family. It just melted my heart. It was really lovely and really sweet. And the final scene is with Freddy and the girl from the art gallery. It's not a bad final scene. I enjoyed this episode a lot. I thought it was very well done. As I said, the second half did feel a little bit repetitive. Maybe not repetitive, but I feel like had we had one more scene, it would have been starting to get into staleness, because we were in the same art gallery. It wasn't really moving forward very much. The girls' part, we did have a few different locations, but it was very much the same atmosphere. So the second half maybe wasn't as interesting as it could have been, but at the same time I still enjoyed it, which sounds contradictory. The point there, it's not perfect, but I did still thoroughly enjoy it. Highlights, absolutely Alan hissing at the baby seat, and Alan's heart-to-heart with Frasier, and Frasier saying that he's part of the family. Really great episode, really thoroughly enjoyed it. All About Eve is a brilliant third episode, and I cannot wait to find out what the rest of season 2 has in store.